but often growing out of employee investigations.
Thanks, Joe. And as we move into our panel discussion, I wanted to provide some context on both the physical and emotional safety within today's workforce and why this topic of employee risk is so important today. So in a recent ABA survey of the top 350 law firms, 49% of women reported unwanted sexual contact and 28% of women avoided reporting sexual harassment. 60 million US workers claim they've been or are being bullied. 48% of employees have experienced workplace violence. A global transportation and logistics provider has turnover of 35% that results in recruiting costs of over $48 million a year, largely due to misconduct of managers. Gina, this seems to paint a tough spot for employers. And unfortunately, the military is embroiled in its own form of the Me Too movement. What is the impact on preparedness, focus, productivity, recruitment, and retention?
Well, from my experience, this kind of behavior has both strategic impacts at the organizational level and tactical impacts where the mission is being executed. From a strategic perspective, the Air Force every year needs to bring in about 35,000 new recruits. And if they perceive the Air Force as being an environment where bullying, harassment, and even worse, assault are tolerated, it's going to be even harder to recruit talent into the United States Air Force, especially in an era where the unemployment rate is so low today. So that's certainly not the image that an organization that they'll want to join. From a tactical perspective, when this behavior takes place at the unit level, the unit will not perform at its best. This behavior destroys the trust and cohesion that is necessary for any team to perform well. And if one member of the team is compromised, the whole team is compromised, and then the mission is compromised as well. So it's a dramatically negative impact on the military.
In public or private sector, I think organizations see all forms of risky behavior that in some ways is impacting productivity, culture. And Joe, I believe there's some liability here for organizations to act on this, right?
Certainly, employers may be what's called vicariously liable for the misconduct of their employees. The various statutes that a victim may claim under have slightly different tests for vicarious liability, but ultimately, if misconduct comes to litigation, the plaintiff is going to be seeking compensation from the employer, from the company, from the government agency, whatever it might be. Particularly if the misconduct is engaged in by supervisors, it's easier to impose such liability for the conduct of supervisors as opposed to coworkers. But even in the coworker against coworker dispute or harassment scenario, the employer can ultimately be liable